Stacey and I, we spent a lot of time doing these trainings because we really believe in what we have to share with you guys. I've been a teacher about 20 years, a high school basketball coach, spent a lot of time teaching middle schoolers and mostly high schoolers. So my background is in secondary education, and so when we have conversations and we talk, I always filter it through what's that going to look like in my classroom at the secondary level, how are high schoolers going to respond when they have social anxiety and peer pressure and all those things. And so we know this is going to be an important topic for all of us to talk about as we get back into the classroom. So I'm glad you guys are here. It's encouraging. I spent this last year teaching at Warsaw High School, taught science, and I enjoyed it. I worked with Gina there and love the community. It's been really great since we moved here a year ago. I wish for my kids, our 7 kids are all starting back to school. We go from preschool all the way to college and have to endure, like a lot of you that are parents, the same issues. So we're looking at it from both perspectives as teachers and as parents and having to navigate how this is going to go. So hopefully tonight will be a productive conversation.
And I was a school teacher, and then we decided one of us needed to make an income to support all of the children that we had. So I went back and I got my RN and ended up working in the ICU and then transitioning into pediatric mental health. And so, as Darren said, a lot of what we want to teach is not just what we've learned from books, but what we live in our home. And so coming here, we sat through a lot of teachers' meetings, and I've sat through a lot of meetings where I'm like, well, that was a waste of my time. And we're hoping that we don't waste your time tonight, that you leave here with things that you can use and apply in your classroom, starting the week kids come back.
As was introduced, I'm the social emotional learning coordinator for Warsaw, and this world in which we live in right now has looked a little bit different for each of us, and so we're just hoping that this can be applicable. And it's not just tonight and then we're done. If you need to reach out to us, we'll provide our information so that way you can be in touch, because we know that this is ever changing, and some of those scenarios that we're going to come up with or come in front of, they're not going to be ones that we've faced before, and so we want to be able to walk beside you in this work and just be that think partner. So we're so excited that you're here tonight.
So hopefully this will work. Josh, I'm not getting any movement from this thing.
I guess I didn't tell you. I'm a mom of, we have 3 still at home, 1 that just graduated from college, and then a couple others that have gone on and are now living lives and such too. So definitely that blended family, but coming at it from working at home and trying to do e-learning and have those experiences as well.
Craig, will you click that results link and let's see what that shows us? Then click on responses up at the top, right in the middle. So what we wanted to just share with you guys, we sent out the survey. If you didn't get it, it might still be in your email. Just to have a bit of a starting point for all of us to look at where we're at going back into school. It's been a lot of months. I mean, I did the e-learning thing, sat at home and tried to help all of my kids that were doing e-learning, as well as also, planning and grading papers and all those things for my students at the high school. And so it's just been months and months of us being at home, and so getting ready to go back in the middle of all this with all the question marks, we thought this might give us some interesting results. And I do think it's interesting. If the numbers are holding true, when I looked at it a few minutes ago, there were 55 responses, and now there's a few more. So first question, our stress levels. I think this is really important because our stress levels are obviously going to play a part in how well we go back into the classroom. So you can see the results. I think it was about 55% were somewhere 7, 8, 9 in that range when I looked before. And then actually it was borne out in the next question. Craig, if you scroll down, the students, it was about the same. So we kind of put our students in that 7, 8, 9, about 55% of them being north of 7. And I would say if you're at a 7, that's a pretty good stress level. That's pretty high. We would love for our students to be 1s and 2s. So hopefully through some of the conversation tonight, we'll get to the point where we can help them be that way. This, I think, is actually an encouraging result. There is a lot of fear around the virus, around, what's going to happen if we get it and whether we're going to get it and all those things. And so the numbers were actually pretty low on this one. I think these are in, well, they're not in there. Never mind. Yeah, keep going, Craig. This is also encouraging. Gina, you want to talk about this one?
So we know that it's important to be connected, and not only connected or having that person at home, but also someone at work. And this was a question that we asked earlier in the school year, and something that if you went through the happiness course with the IDOE, which I'll refer to, as well as a survey that the Department of Education shared out, and they want to know that connectedness piece, because if you're not connected with someone, then that's a concern. It's easy for us to be isolated. And you can see here, 88.7% of the people that responded said yes, they have that person that they can count on. And you need that accountability person. You need somebody that you can check in with, and that someone that can check in with you and say, hey, I think you need a break right now. What does that look like? And so just understanding that and knowing that, hey, this is something we can celebrate, but also how can you make sure that those other people, your professional learning communities, how can you make sure that your people that you're working with have that person? And if they don't have it, how can you help them find that? Maybe you're not going to be that person, and I would say that you need to be careful. You can't be that one person for everybody. When we talk about suicide prevention, we talk about having that support network around us. And this is the same thing. We really want to have a support network. And so I just encourage you to take a deeper look into that and make sure that that continues to grow in your life, because that's important. And then that same thing with the wellness. Another question, and you'll see here, and I'll talk a little bit more about it during my part of the presentation, but that 52% would say they see the importance, but they struggle finding that consistent time. And I encourage you to be able to move up and say, I understand that importance, and I'm making time regularly for myself. Because if we're not doing it now, and we add school on top of it, where are we going to be? And we know we've talked before, if you're not regulated, you can't regulate someone else. So I have to take care of myself first if I'm going to be able to take care of other people. And carving out that time is so important.
Okay, Craig, if you want to, I think, jump back over to the slideshow. Oh, the one on the left at the top.
So I want to talk about the reason I believe in you guys, and you are so needed. We talk about essential workers in our communities right now, and I believe that teachers are essential workers. I believe you are frontline workers. I work for a program, as Bruce said, in Arizona called Trauma Lens Care, or TLC. I provide trainings and support across the state, and then within the county that I work, I developed an app where police actually give information on scene of what is happening to students. I take that information to the principal and the teacher at that school so that we can intervene at the point of trauma for our students. And so what I have seen in my county in Arizona that I work for is TLCs that go unanswered. I receive the TLCs from officers on scene of what's happening to our kids while we're all in quarantine in the middle of a pandemic, and I have no frontline defense anymore. And so it's been devastating, because in Arizona there's been an uptick in domestic violence, an uptick in drug use, an uptick in drug overdose and mortality. There's been upticks in child abuse as well, but not reported. DCS is reporting less calls. They're reporting less removals. This does not mean that there's less abuse occurring. What we are seeing is that when we look at abuse or child abuse, or even adult, like domestic violence and abuse, social isolation is what we use to actually contain abuse and keep it secret. So a pandemic and a quarantine has allowed abusers to use the social isolation to continue the abuse without the eyes of our front line, which would be teachers and pediatricians. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart that you're going back in 3 weeks, because TLCs need to be answered. And our kids that are living in minimal homes or are living in abusive situations, they need you. And we all know that the majority of abuse in children is not reported. The majority of abuse in children is not reported. However, I also know that a relationship with one caring person changes the trajectory for our students. Relationship, that is an agent of change for our children, and you guys are so needed. So I wanted to make sure that the information I gave you was relevant. So I called police in our area. I talked to upper levels in the police department, and yes, you as well have an uptick in domestic violence. You have an uptick in drug overdose. You have an uptick in drug busts. And we hear those sirens, and we know it's happening, but we don't hear about the children that are sitting on scene when it does happen. I called DCS, and I spoke with representatives with DCS. You have less calls to DCS. We have less hotline calls. However, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had an increase in calls because summer school started. So I wanted to do this class and this training, and I went to Pastor Bruce and I said, let us do this training. And I went to Gina and I said, do this training with us, because I want you guys to know you are our front line for these kids. And I know this is hard, and I know this is scary, and I know we're going to go back, and there's so many unknowns, but our children need us. They absolutely need us. So thank you.
One of the things Stacey and I talk about often when we do trainings, and especially kind of focus on trauma in kids, we talk about communication. And there's a rule called the 738-55 rule, which when you look at how we communicate, only 7% of emotional content is delivered through words. 38% is tone of voice, 55% is body language. So this is going to be a challenge for us, right? Kids communicate in body language. They watch your body language, whether your eyebrows are doing things, your tone of voice, if you're speaking in a nice calm cadence. Like, we talk about that stuff a lot because it's really vital. You can actually regulate kids with just the way you communicate and the way you talk to them. And so one of the issues with this is going to be the masks, right? So we want to spend the first little bit tonight kind of talking about how the masks are going to interfere with our ability to communicate well with our students, and then thereby affect our ability to regulate them, right? Like, you guys know when you text people and you get a text sometimes and you're like, well, what do they mean by that? Are they happy? Are they laughing? And then an emoji comes through and you're like, oh, okay. They were, now I get it, right? We had to create an entire language of pictures to be able to tell what people mean when they send us a text.
My kids send me the poop emoji.
I didn't know this until the other day. I heard on the radio there's actually Emojipedia. There's a whole encyclopedia of these emoticons. And I thought, well, that's so ridiculous. This is typical humans. Let's make up a new language to communicate. Anyway, I don't like, my kids at school are always bent out of shape in my classroom. They're like, he said this or she said that. And I'm like, just put the phone away. You won't know what they're saying. So we want to talk about something called social referencing.
Social referencing. So this is what you guys are going to deal with in your classrooms. All right. The best way for me to describe social referencing is, do you guys think about like a 2-year-old on the playground and they run and they trip and they look back to mom, and what do they do if mom's face goes? They cry. But what if mom just smiles at them? What do? They keep going. Because we use facial cues to regulate children, we are taking away one of the abilities that we regulate children when we wear a mask over our face. Social referencing is how a child references new and novel things. So the beginning of a school year with a teacher is new and novel, and especially your children who come from hard places or have had trauma, they're going to filter all new and novel things, and they're going to be looking to be regulated through facial cues, which right now we're taking away. So I'm really recommending, if possible, you wear a face shield or you pull your mask down when you're at a distance from your kids, because they need those cues. There was an interesting study done on 6-year-olds using facial recognition. So they took all these 6-year-olds and they showed them 7 pictures of different emotions on faces. And what was super interesting was that the kids could all readily identify, that's angry, that's sad, that's happy. There was one emotion that most of the kids could not identify from the facial pictures. Does anyone know what that emotion was? Just a guess? If I call on you, you might be afraid. Fear. Kids couldn't identify fear in the pictures. And here's why. Children learn emotions in themselves by recognizing them externally in other people. So, we don't like children to think we're afraid. We don't tell children, Mom's afraid right now. So if I don't learn what fear is, then I actually don't know how to recognize it in myself. Does that make sense? So if we are covering faces, we're taking away the ability for some children to recognize the emotion in themselves. And so it's super important that we are explaining things. You think about I'm sure all of us have thought about which of our kids are really going to struggle. I have a son that's deaf. This is going to be a really hard year for him. He's already struggling out in the world right now, just going to the store. He can't hear you. He can't read your lips. He can't read your face. Okay? We also know that our kids that are on the autism spectrum, they're going to struggle because they don't have that implicit social map anyway. And so we already know of our kids that are going to struggle, but what I want you to think about is that your kids that are coming from hard places, and a lot of our kids that are younger, are going to struggle with the masks because of social referencing and the inability to read your face and your expressions.
So I think, Craig, I don't know if this thing's working or not. It seems like it's not. If we didn't have Murphy's Law. I think the important thing that I take away from this, the next slide, which talks about, it's got the picture of the Disney characters with the masks on. And I think that one of the things we need to do as teachers is have conversations with our students about fear and about our emotions. So when kids struggle to maybe recognize emotions, you have to say them. We talk about it a lot. We use the term name it to tame it. Like when a kid is upset or something, you can say to them, I see you're angry, or I can see that you're frustrated, and you give it words to what they're feeling. And that's a really important thing because they don't have the ability to use words to describe it. 6-year-olds, I've got a 4-year-old, I've got a 9-year-old, they don't come to me and say, I'm really frustrated because, I didn't sleep well last night. They tell me, but they tell me in other ways. And so when the mask thing and social referencing, I think it's just really vital that we learn ways to talk about our emotions and to say, personally, I don't like the masks. I wouldn't like to teach in one. I wouldn't like, I don't like having to wear them. And I would probably say that to my students. But I would also say it's something we have to do. We can handle it. We're big kids, we can deal with it. So I think it's that conversation's important.
And so some of the things when you're looking to help your students, especially younger, is practice. What is my face doing right now? I want you to look at my eyes. Oh, does it look like I'm smiling? Or if you are upset with your class or you're trying to get your kids in line and you're going to give them the teacher look, then you need to pull your mask down to give the teacher look, right? Or practice the teacher look with your mask up so they recognize it, right? But you're going to have to be a lot more verbal in expressing and saying out loud what your feelings are. I'm feeling frustrated right now, all right? Class, we need to quiet down. Or, so you're going to have to be expressing those things way more often than normal because you've lost a component of regulation with your students. All right?
We also talked about, I think it was within our discussion, what could hand signals look like, especially if you're in the hallway, and short of pulling your mask down and whistling or yelling at them. What could a hand signal look like? What are some agreements that you could come up with during that time when you're talking about your procedures? That this is just part of that conversation, and some of those things I'm sure will come about as you're working on those procedures and what does it look like just for your building. But being able to have some of those nonverbal cues when everybody is masked, and then also just remembering that some of our kids are going to need a break from that mask and that they don't need to be shamed because of that, but they can have a safe spot for that still allows for that 6 feet and allows for that time. I can tell you that when I'm wearing my mask, I need that when I'm in the grocery store. There are times that I remove my mask. I don't like that hot feeling. And like Darren said, I'm a big girl, I've got to do this, right? But I need that break. So if I need that break as an adult, what does that look like for my students? And we can't assume. Just like we can't say, oh, okay, well, this group of kids, they're going to struggle, or we've done this up to this point and we haven't had any trouble, so therefore no one will have trouble. We can't assume that. We have to allow for that space and that conversation, and then just have those high expectations, but also that grace and that understanding.
Also, and I know I'm going to say something that you probably already know, but not all of your students have been prepared for what's going on, right? We can hope that all of our students know, but I'm going to tell you that you're going to have students that are going to walk in your classroom and think they might get corona today and die tomorrow. And so you have to address that the first day. You need to sit down with your students and talk about the science behind corona. We are wearing masks to keep other people safe. You are wearing a mask because we want to keep grandma and grandpa healthy. The mask you have on right now doesn't keep you from getting germs. That's not how, I'm a nurse, that's not how the mask that we wear, that doesn't do anything. That keeps your cough and your sneeze from going on to other people, but you're still gonna breathe in things. And so you can do something simple like you can show how germs are spread, all right? Just take some, maybe not glitter, because that's bad. Flour or pepper and put it on a plate. This is for younger students, and say, without a mask, if I sneeze or cough, what happens? And it blows out. Put a mask on. With a mask on, if I sneeze or cough, what happens? My germs are not spreading. And we don't want our germs to spread because we have grandparents and people that we want to keep safe. Our kids need to know they're not going to get corona and die by coming to school, right? And we can share the science behind that. Our children are not dying from corona. But you're going to have kids that come to school and think that might happen, all right? So
the only, like you can see the list, a couple other things, setting up your classroom, making sure you go through procedures. Those are things that individually you as teachers are going to have to decide what you do in your classroom based upon what your administrators tell you. I mean, what are you going to do when a kid just says, I'm taking my mask off? What are you going to do when a kid forgets and they just don't put it on? When they chew a hole in it, what are you going to do then?
Or when they pull it down to sneeze, when they lick it, when there's a big wet spot in the middle, when they use it to blow their nose. There's a lot of things that you're going to have to get with your team and decide you're going to do, because you all know what it's going to look like, right? We all know what it's going to look like. And then the last one I want to just say, breathe, all right? When you're in a mask and when we go into stressful things, what starts happening is we start taking shallower breaths. That's just stress. And we start taking shallower breaths and we have a mask on and it feels kind of claustrophobic. Breathe with your kids. And I've done the 4-7-8 with students, and I've done it with my own kids, where you basically get all the air out of your lungs and you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, hold for 7, blow out for 8. So let me have you guys try that with me really fast, okay? Blow out all your air. Breathe in through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. Whoosh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right? Do that with your kids frequently throughout the day because breathing actually relaxes us.
Stacey and I, having been foster parents for a lot of years, we were in Arizona, licensed foster family, 25 to 30 foster children, something like that. After that many, you start to lose count. We adopted several of our foster children, and so we live with trauma all the time. And so then, as we were working in a classroom and working with students and working with teachers, you see the effects of trauma all the time. And so we talk about this a lot. We actually have a nonprofit that we started called Lost Sparrows, and we get to travel all over parts of Europe and talk to people about these same issues and present and do education on what trauma does in the kid's brain and how it changes their perception of the world and how it changes everything about them. And so not every kid has trauma, but we have enough that we need to know some things. And so when we start to talk about some of these next issues, there's always a percentage of your class that are going to have some trauma, and so those are kids that are probably the ones we need to focus on because those are the ones that are going to cause the most problem and have the hardest time being able to function well in a structured classroom. And so how many of you ever have sat through a training where trauma was the topic? Have we had some of that? I know Gina does some of this. It's excellent, I hope, because as a teacher for years, I sat in so many trainings and I walked away afterwards going, what was the point of that? I didn't learn anything. And so we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure we cover relevant topics and topics that might help you take that one child in your classroom that you really don't want to deal with and help you to learn good ways to deal with them and have some compassion for some of those kids that have some rough backgrounds.
So when we're talking about trauma, we like to define trauma as big T's or little t's. Little traumas, big traumas, right? And so in the world of trauma, we can define it as any stressful event that is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable. What does that sound like? This whole pandemic? Right? I mean, I don't know if you guys saw, but Fauci wants us to start wearing goggles. So every week it's something new, right? Or we retract and we say, nope, not this anymore, or now this. And so we've all experienced what's considered a big T. Okay, little T's are little traumas that they consider like divorce or moving or loss of a job. But when we look at a big trauma, that would be like a natural disaster or a loss of a child or a pandemic, right? And so the tough thing about being in a pandemic is that pandemic is not defined by time and space. There's no, I don't see an end right now. Where a natural disaster is more of a one-off event, we're in the middle of something that's just a continuation. And so when we see that a lot of people are feeling like 7 and 8 to go back to work, and we know that our students are feeling the same, we're going to know that we're walking into a school year with people who have a stress response system that has been overridden for a while. How many of you have noticed that you might have a thinner emotional margin? I have 7 kids. I don't think I've ever had a thick emotional margin. But yes, I'm finding myself snapping quicker at my kids, right? How many of you find yourself struggling to maintain self-care? No, I'm just kidding. I've only said that because Gina told me, I haven't done my hair in a while.
I washed my hair for you guys today.
Yeah, so did I.
Just know that.
Right. I've been wearing like sweatpants every day, so.
And these pants still fit, so
Mine
I was
too.
happy about that.
All right. So how many of us are struggling maybe some with self-care? Okay. How many of you are exercising on a regular basis and eating healthy? You can leave. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. That's awesome. That's awesome because self-care is what we need to be doing. But what happens when you have stress and it keeps going and going? You stop being able to manage as well. Okay? And so we're walking into a classroom and we're going to co-regulate all of our students who are also struggling with a stress response system that's overridden. So what do we do with that? Well, you're doing self-care. That's awesome, right? That's huge. That's important, is caring for ourselves. And Gina's going to go into a lot of that. But we also have to look at how we're setting up environment in our classrooms to bring our kids down and to make us successful. And we're going to go into more of what that looks like, but a lot of that looks like Groundhog Day. A lot of that looks like doing the same thing over and over, because that's what calms a child's brain. That's what calms the child's brain. And then also talking about it. Taking the time to meet them where they're at in their emotions, and you might spend 3 or 4 weeks doing the same thing and talking about the same thing, because that's where they're at. We cannot expect to walk in and achieve academic excellence right now. When you roll out your 3rd grade material, you need to be rolling out last year's 2nd grade 6th-month material that they mastered at the beginning of 2nd grade. They need to walk in and be successful with last year's work, even if it takes 3 weeks of the same thing, because their stress level can't be like, shoot, I've got to learn a new concept, because they're not in that headspace to do that. Now, you might feel the drive to catch up all the time that's lost, and here's the beauty of a child's brain: they will catch up. They're gonna be okay if we meet them at the emotional space they're at and take the time to let them be successful at last year's concepts, because it calms their amygdala and calms their brain down.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Please.
So as I'm hearing her say this, I think pre-COVID, we did SABRES, which was a student assessment behavior rating scale, and we asked our teachers to just look at their students, their homeroom class, and then we also had our students do it. And it was really amazing to me, the students and how they would rate themselves, whether it was on depression or anxiety or just being prepared for class, and their view of themselves in that moment. And then looking at the same teachers and their reflection on that student. And many times the teachers would say, no, the student is fine, right? Like they've got 1s and 2s, everything's great. And the student is ranking themselves as an 8, 9, or 10. And that was pre-COVID. So as I hear Stacey saying these things, I think about my son, who I would say is in a home, where he is loved and cared for. But I know that he's a high anxiety kiddo, and I know he's worried about things, and until he can just jump in and tackle it, it's big for him. But if my son is looked at by his name and we're like, oh, he's fine, he doesn't have anything because of who his mom and dad is, then he doesn't have a fair shake. And I think that so many times when we're getting ready and we're preparing, if we know that we have a student with a disability, or if we know that we have so many different English language learners, we prepare our lesson differently, because we know that we have to reach all of those different students. And I think we have to do the same thing with this. We have to really look at that group and not make those assumptions. Understand that they could come with that and they might not communicate it. It might not come out in that first week. Everything could be fine. I know when I talked to Darren about that in that check-in, he's like, high school students they're not gonna tell you. Everything's great, they're fine. When really you're still hitting some things that they're dealing with, and they're listening, they just might not be communicating it. Now, our 5 and 6-year-olds, yeah, they're gonna tell you about the police that came to the house last night and how mom did this. I mean, they're an open book, right? And some of it might not even be true. But just understanding that, you do have that continuum and you just need to allow that space.
And just a quick hack for you guys. One of the best things for calming a limbic system is handwriting. Copy this from the board as your bell work when you walk in the first day. It's something they can be successful at typically. And it actually, that coordination and it actually brings the brain back online. Okay? So that's always a good thing. If they're younger, you can have them draw a picture.
Okay, so one of the things I talked about my classroom with my anatomy students this year, neural networks, and that's one of the things that happens when you put a kid into a task-positive network. It gets them out of what they call the default mode network. There's a lot of science and all that it's really intriguing to see. And what it does is it changes the brain, like it switches from this circuit to a different circuit, And that's a good thing for kids. It helps them be in the moment. So you give them a monotonous thing to do, like handwriting, but it's a task that requires some concentration, but it's not overwhelming. There's lots of those things you can do, and you can do a lot of research in those sorts of things and learn some good strategies that I think help us all in the classroom.
And preschool and kindergarten sorting. So we, for my kids, that when they get stressed, my children will do incessant chattering. That's their stress thing. I would take black and white beans, and I would have them sort them. So just think about those hands-on manipulation things that will bring the brain down. That's good bell work, because you want them to walk in your classroom and give them a task they're going to be getting busy right away, but they're going to be successful at.
Okay, so this is our daughter Zori. She hides her emotions well. I mean, you can tell. You can't ever tell what she's thinking. She's ruthless, she's ruthless. We call her the Kraken, because she will tell you how your life's going to be. I'd like to hear from you guys. What expectations, what are we thinking as we go back in the classroom first day, first few days, first week? What behaviors, what things are we expecting that we might see? Have you thought about this?
You can just shout it out since we can't come to you.
I hope so.
I am.
Yeah. Nervousness, yeah. Frustration. Social anxiety, yeah. I know my 13-year-old is really excited about being around other kids. Like, he can't wait to go back and be social. So what does that tell a teacher for these kids that haven't been around their friends for 5 months? What can you expect? They need to socialize. They are going to socialize. If you try to put a lid on that right away, it's going to be an uphill battle, I think. So I think as a teacher, I'm going to set my classroom up, and I'm going to allow for more social time than I would normally. Hey, get with a partner and do this project. Hey, talk around your table and come up, I'm going to try to find ways to adapt what I'm teaching to give it to them in a way that they can be more interactive and more social with their peers, because they need it. It's not like, as adults we need it, but we have so much more regulatory systems developed and, more skills, and they don't. And so they're going to need that. So I would expect that some of you guys are going to be frustrated, and they're going to want to talk to their friends. What other things? Hard to get away from. You give it the routine of, I'm with my family all the time, and now I'm leaving that. Say again? Defiant. Why would they be defiant? Yeah, it's stress, right? Like, kids in stressful situations might be defiant. Like, you're going to say, put your mask on. I'm a high school teacher, right? We deal with 4-letter words on a regular basis, right? And they come at you sometimes, and it's usually a stress response from kids, and you don't ever want to have that happen, but it does happen. So I think all of you guys kind of know, and I think what we're saying is we can expect, so we want to talk about what those behaviors might look like and how we respond appropriately. Because we, in some of our classes, we refer to being first responders, right? Being as parents that are first responders. And teachers, you are first responders. We don't want to be reactors. We want to be responders, right? First responders, when you talk about medical services, police, those guys, what makes them so good? They know that things are going to happen. They train for the things that are going to happen, and they know how to keep calm in the light of a stressful car crash or something that happens. And so when we talk about being first responders as parents or teachers, we know the behaviors are going to come. We know why they're going to come too. And then we have a plan in place, and we're going to be able to keep calm in the light of a kid doing something that we really don't want. So that's what we hope the next conversation as we go through this is going to help us to get to.
And I hope you walk away and recognize when a kid says, I'm not putting a mask on, or I'm not doing that, and it's in regards to a mask, it's actually not about the mask. It's not about the mask, okay?
It could just be that they're tired, right? At the end of the day, that rigor is going to look different at the beginning. So understanding that too. All behavior is communication. What are they really communicating to you with that behavior?
What do you guys think you'll see in parents?
Craig, the little clicker's not working, so I'm going to give you a secret code when I want you to change the slide, okay? So the next slide is what you guys are all going to look like. in a week, 2-3 weeks from now. Go ahead, Greg. Can you slide? Can you advance them for me? This one, right? And I think this is funny, but it's really important because what do? People ask us all the time, "How you doing?" And our pat answer is, "I'm fine." Like in our society, we're not real open with our emotions, and I think that's a problem. I think that all of us are going to have them, and we need to have conversations about those things. It really does help to share your emotions and know that there are other people going through the same things.
So we have this, and it's in your handout. And what we would like you to do, if you have a pen, that's great. You can fill this in. If not, just look through it and mentally fill it in.
She was going to say to please share your neighbor's pen.
I didn't say that.
Lick it and pass it to the next person.
Okay. I want you to think about, what do we see in the body when it's under stress in adults? What do we see in adults when we are feeling stress? You guys can shout it out if you want. Sleeplessness, yep. Stomach aches. What? Disconnectedness, yep. Snappy, what'd you say? Changes in weight, absolutely. Hair loss. Food choices. Migraines. Yep. Ticks. Not the kind in the woods.
If you guys have ever, if you've heard of Bessel van der Kolk, he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. He talks a lot about this, about the body keeps the score for trauma. Like you can see it, it'll be in the body, the stress response.
Okay, so let's move over to the mind. What is the internal loop in someone's mind saying when they're stressed? We all have an internal voice. Negative. How am I going to handle this? I think I have cancer. I have a pain in my leg. Right? Overthinking, racing thoughts, muddled thoughts. Shut down.
And then bring back what Holly said, frustration. Right? This is you're going to see this. I guarantee it. You're going to give kids work, and they're going to look at it and go, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do it." And they may not remember, but that academic frustration is going to show up, and it's going to show up right away. When you expect them to be able to have a skill and they can't do it, they're going to get frustrated. What happens after they get frustrated? They get angry, and then you have like this escalation point. So you got to know that's coming.
And so what about when you see that? So one of the things that we always teach, especially parenting, is that we have 3 ages. We have a chronological age, we have a cognitive or developmental age, and then we have an emotional age. So an example would be that my 12-year-old came home, and I'm like, "Hey, get your shoes on," because he had been outside running around in the grass and the sprinklers. "Get your shoes on, we're going to go into town." And in that moment, he flops himself on the ground like a 3-year-old and says, "I can't tie my shoes." Now he's 12, and cognitively, developmentally, he's 12, but he has a pretty severe trauma history, and his emotional age in that moment is probably 3. When you see a student in your class who drops into an emotional age that is younger than their chronological developmental age, you must teach to the emotional age. You do not teach to the chronological developmental age. You must meet them at the emotional age. So instead of saying, "Quit acting like a 3-year-old, I know you know how to tie your shoes, get in the car," I understand it's not about the shoes, it's not about the mask, it's not about the things that they're portraying, it's an underlying need. So I sit by him and say, "I can see that today that you're having a hard time and maybe you have a lot of fear in you. Let me help you tie your shoe." Does that mean that he just manipulated me? No, because it wasn't, he's a 3-year-old right then. Does that mean he no longer knows how to tie his shoe? No, he's 12 and can tie his shoe. What it means is that when you see students present at an emotional age that is much younger than their developmental chronological age, you need to teach to the emotional age to bring them back up and bring their brain out of the survival brain into the thinking brain. Okay? And the wider the gap, my guess is that you have a student that's endured some pretty heavy trauma somewhere. Okay? The wider the gap you see in a kid is usually the heavier or the more trauma they've endured at some point in their childhood. Okay?
Probably most of us know the word regression. Do we know what the word regression means? As you see somebody who regresses, you see they have made progress and now they regress, right? So we can expect some academic regression, probably loss of some skills, but that's not nearly as significant as the emotional regression you see in students sometimes. So what I think our priority right now, going back into a classroom, I am actually not going back to teach this year, but if I was preparing to do so, I would be preparing 80% to meet the emotional needs of my students. They need their emotional needs met, not academic needs. That's going to come later, but if you don't meet their emotional needs, then you will never get to the academic needs. So the way the brain works, the brain has to be open to learning. When it's not open to learning, it won't learn. So you've got to get them feeling good about things, and then they learn really quickly. And so thinking about that on that chart, we did the body and the mind, the emotions. We listed some of them. Frustration would be an emotion. What other emotions do you think you will see? Fear.
What does fear usually come out as?
Yeah, anger.
Anger is the cover emotion for fear.
Nice, that's true.
We have to remember in those spaces that, just like they were saying, that you're not in that right, they're not right in the right part of their brain, that's also not the time when you're going to be teaching what they should have done, right? Like that's not when Stacey said, well, you should have done this, or this is how you communicate that with me. They're not in that space. And so remembering that there will be a time, and maybe it's intentional during your meeting time or your closing time at the end of the day that you just have a big conversation about it, or maybe it's a side conversation later, but it cannot be in that moment. If you choose for that moment, you might win because you've had the last word, but they're not receiving any of that information.
Yeah. Stressful moments are not teachable moments. Okay, so on the bottom of that chart, right, you've got emotions and behaviors, and there's some overlap there. So I would say this: you should expect lots of peer conflict. You're going to see kids arguing with other kids. Well, he touched me, she touched, like they took their mask off, they took my, like that is going to be escalated, and it's going to be a stress response. So you're going to have to put out some fires, I think, with kids. You're going to see out on the playground, you're going to see kids being aggressive probably. You're going to see, like they need playground time. I personally saying I'm going to meet my kids' emotional needs. If I'm an elementary teacher, I'm going to ask to get my kids on the playground twice as much as normal because they need to be out there playing with their peers and reintegrating into the system. Now, I'm not an administrator. Your administrators can tell you to do whatever, but my advice would be, and I know a teacher here in the Warsaw district who actually taught in our district in Arizona, and he had the highest test scores of any of the teachers in 4th grade, and he spent more time on the playground than any other class in 4th grade. So I think there's a correlation between those. That's personally, right? I don't have any scientific data to say that that's true, but it was true for his class.
We do have scientific data, though, that children learn faster through play. There is that scientific data.
And understanding that if you don't have the space, because I think some of our administrators might have been cringing, like, no, there's a schedule and I can't get everyone out there safely. You can still play games in the classroom. You can still have those spaces. If it's raining, you don't say, sorry about you missed recess today. What does that look like? How can we just be really intentional with those moments to provide what the child needs?
All right, Greg. So the slide, I think the one with the goldfish. Right, we can go to that one.
So there is a filled-in graph so that you can look at your own or refer to. of some of the things that we see in the body, mind, emotion, and behavior. We're going to go into what we see in kids in a minute. But one of the cool things I get to do with Trauma Lens Care is it actually started in the jail. I started teaching inmates in our county jail, men and women, and I would go in and I would talk about adverse childhood experiences and parenting their own kids, and really working through addiction and why maybe their brains were going the direction that they went. Because it is my belief that drugs often are an external choice to medicate internal pain. And so I started going in, and how many of you have taken the ACEs quiz or know what that is? Right? So the ACEs quiz, when you get above a score of 4, which it's basically like a cholesterol score for childhood trauma. So it's questions that are asking about childhood trauma. So when you get above a score of 4, you start seeing health issues across the lifespan, from pulmonary disease to cardiovascular disease to mental health issues to criminality to drug use to suicidal ideation, right? So we see how, and as a nurse it's fascinating because you see how early childhood actually affects us across the lifespan. Well, I started giving this ACEs quiz to the male and female inmates, and the scores range from 0 to 10. And when you get above a 6, it's devastating. We're talking a 20-year shortened lifespan. We're talking 3,000 times more likely to commit suicide, 1,500% more likely to use IV drugs. And you know, as a nurse, I deal in statistics. So if I'm like, hey, Pastor Bruce, drink that water and you're 30% more likely to get COVID, do you think he's going to drink the water? No. 30% is not, I mean, that's little compared to 3,000%, right? And so we get above 6, and we start seeing just this crazy, devastating statistics for people. The average score of my inmates, and I have worked with hundreds of males and hundreds of female inmates, is 7. 7. And these are students that sat in our classes. These are students that sat in my classes. And so then I started asking, like, what age did you start using? What do you guys think the average age of hardcore drugs is in the inmates that I worked with? 11 and 12. Then I had an inmate who was like, Stacey, you need to be asking us when we started marijuana and alcohol because those are not considered hard drugs to us. What do you guys think the average age was for that? 8. 3rd grade. I taught 3rd grade. I had students in my class that were starting marijuana and alcohol in 3rd grade. And so I'm teaching this class to women, because I have to go in and I can teach to women, and then they go back and I teach the men. And I'm teaching to women, and I'm talking about when they're parenting their kids, that their kids are like goldfish shark. And you see the shark fin in their behaviors. We see the shark fin in the lying, in the cheating, in the stealing, in the talking back, in the cursing, and all those things. But the reality is that our kids are actually really scared goldfish. That if you look past the shark fin to the underneath, then we see the scared goldfish. And had this woman inmate say, Stacey, I wished that one of my teachers would have seen that I was scared every single day. That I was the worst kid in my junior high, but every day I went to school terrified, and had one single teacher saw me as being scared. She goes, I would have just fallen apart for them and told them what was happening to me. And I think it's so important that we see that, because we believe that scared kids do scary things. And if we don't intervene, they become hurt adults who hurt people. And so when we're looking at behaviors in our kids and we're coming back to school, what we want you to take from this is all the shark fins that you're seeing have nothing to do with sharks. It has to do with scared goldfish.
The next slide, we're going to talk about a little bit about how the brain develops. And so when we talk about developmental trauma, we hear that term nowadays, developmental trauma. Developmental trauma is the idea that trauma happens when the process of brain development, and so it interferes with the way the brain operates. The brain, therefore, has changed the architecture, just like if you're building a building and you screw up the foundation, the rest of the building is going to have problems. And so in development, in utero, all the way through the first year and a half or so of life, real critical time, right? Attachment, bonding, all of the things that come with that. Children learn so much about the world. They learn how the world is supposed to operate. They learn that someone's going to meet my needs, that people are predictable, that the world is safe. That's what they're supposed to learn. So if trauma happens in there, mom is killed in a car accident, something, divorce, physical abuse, neglect, things like that happen, then that architecture, the way the brain is put together changes. That is not a kid's choice. So when you have a kid in 3rd grade who is choosing to do marijuana or drink alcohol, it is real likely that it is almost not a choice. I know that's a controversial thing in our society. People say it all the time. You made the choice. Yes, there is choice involved. But when you look at inmates and you see that number of 7 aces on all those inmates, there's a correlation between those things. And so it's a little hard to see on here, but real brief description of how the brain works, right? How many of you have seen the little hand model of the brain? Have you ever seen how this works? So this is I did not come up with this, but it's pretty easy to understand. The basement of the brain, the bottom part of the brain, this is where like life support is, tells you to breathe and your heartbeat, and when you're hungry tells you to eat food, simple stuff. Then the middle part in here, this is where we deal with emotions. So the seat of the brain, the emotional part of the brain, this develops, sorry, I should have said the lower part of the brain is developing in utero to real early on. That's the first part. And then this is building. Then emotions build in those years up to 2 years old, 3 years old, when kids have real big emotions. And then the thinking brain, the cerebral cortex, forms after that. Right, so that's pretty simple. It's a complicated organ, but it's a simple way to remember this. And so what happens when we are thinking clearly, we should be using our cerebral cortex. This is a part of the brain that learns, that remembers, that gives us personality, executive functioning skills. This is where we want to operate. So what happens when we have a stress response, now this is literal, not metaphorical, the thinking part of the brain goes offline. So we're no longer having access to cognition, to logic, to processing, and now we react out of our emotions and out of survival mode. And so the problem with developmental trauma, what it does is it keeps kids living right here. They can't live with their thinking brain online. So try to teach that child, right? Try to teach them math, try to teach them reading, and these complicated processes, and they can't do it. And I know you guys, if you've taught kids like this, one of our children, we were trying to teach her to read. She's 2 years old. She has lots and lots of trauma in her background. Reading a book, CAT, C-A-T, and I'd go through C. I'm reading, we're laying in her bed at night. We're reading before she goes to sleep. I said C. She said C. I said A. She said A. I said T. She said T. I said, okay, now what is it? I don't know, right? She's like, 2nd grade, like she should be reading. And 27 times, I know I shouldn't have counted, 27 times in a row, C-A-T, C-A-T. And she repeated it 27 times. And on the 28th time, I said, okay, what's this letter? She can't tell me. Well, that's not normal, right? She doesn't have a normal brain. So when the thinking brain goes offline and the kids react out of emotions, and guess who else does this? We do. Right? We have a stress response. You get a kid that stands, you say, hey, put that iPad away and get out your book and read chapter 4. Slam something down, kick the table. I got to take a deep breath because I don't like that kind of behavior. It gets me going like this. So we need to recognize that the brain, there's problems going on in the brain, and it's pretty simple when you use this as an analogy, that the thinking brain goes offline and kids react, and we don't want to react the same way. We want to maintain our composure and be able to think logically. And you guys will see the evidence when you have a kid and you say, why did you do that? Which is the worst question any parent should ever ask a child, right, or a teacher. Why did you do that? And they go, I don't know. I don't know. They don't know because they're not thinking. Their brain is not working right. So anyway, so a lot of that to talk about. Then the next slide, which you'll see, is talking about how that leads into behaviors.
Well, and I think it's important to understand that when a student is like this, that you have to get them back to this. So how do we do that? Like, how do I take my kid who just slammed a book down and kicked his chair or whatever, how do I get them to hear, right? Well, the first thing is you have to be to hear. You have to be here first. And that's hard because I'm going to tell you, when that happens in your classroom, your fear response, you're already going into little brain because you're thinking, oh crud, I'm going to lose control of this classroom. He's going to lose control, and here's where we're going to go, and he's going to end up here, and this is what, because we're already trying to predict the future, and the future we're going to try and predict is the worst thing that's going to maybe happen, right? So instead, you have to control yourself in that moment and say, everything's okay. And don't let yourself trying to project a future of bad in that moment, so you are going to regulate yourself first. And that might not be addressing it that very second. He kicked a chair and he sat down. My mind tells me that's defiance and I'm going to drop the hammer on that. No. Nowhere does it say you drop the hammer right in that moment. In fact, that's the worst thing, because he's in a little brain and you're in a little brain, and what does that look like? Two little brains fighting? Does that go anywhere good? No. It is okay in that moment to step away and get yourself regulated. Step away and get yourself regulated. Take your breaths and be okay. And you're going to think that shark fin is not about what the request I just made. And we call this the ABCs, XYZs of teaching or parenting. The XYZ is the shark fin. The ABC is why we're seeing XYZ. So what has happened prior? You've got to go back. So you're going to regulate, then you're going to relate. The relate is to look at it and say, what's the ABC? Okay. He doesn't want to wear a mask. He's triggered. He's scared. You have to become a behavior detective a little bit to figure out what triggered this kid, right? So you're going to regulate yourself, relate by thinking about what was the ABC to cause this XYZ, and then you're going to co-regulate. And in the moment when someone is doing this, your words don't work because language goes offline. It's really fascinating, and this is bad, I think this is fascinating, but if you watch an older child pitch a fit who's regressing back to an emotional age of a 3-year-old, their body regresses to a 3-year-old as well. Their gross motors decline. Their language, the pitch of their voice goes up. Have you noticed that in someone throwing a fit? The pitch of their voice goes higher? Yes, but even us, right? That's because we did this, and we lose language, and we lose a lot of the things that we have in the upper brain. So to co-regulate, I am not using this word, Gina, calm down. Because in the history of man, telling a student to calm down has worked never. Never. So, I know this is different with masks and social distancing, but I'm just going to tell you, if I'm in a situation like this, I have to co-regulate this student without language, then I have to use proximity, and I have to use my body language. And I'm going to get down to what Gina's level is, and I'm going to say, You must be really frustrated right now. I appreciate that this is really frustrating. And then I'm going to walk away and leave it for a minute, and I'm going to say, if you need to talk to me or you're ready to talk to me, you can come talk to me. Okay? But you can easily de-escalate by not joining in as a little brain to another little brain. We have to do this all the time. I have children in my home that have been through some severe trauma who are teenagers. And I don't just get to pass them off to Darren because he works with them. You can de-escalate little brains by remembering, regulate yourself, relate and think about the ABCs for the XYZ, and then co-regulate, but remember you're not using words. Does anyone have questions about that?
So each building and each school district is going to look a little different. I'm sitting here nodding and telling you that. On the first day of summer school for our pre-K through 5, I talked to one of the teachers and I just said, how did it go? And the first thing out of her mouth, now mind you, I did not have conversation up to that point about what is it going to look like, what are you worried about? The first thing out of her mouth was, I hugged kids today. And oh, did my kindergarten heart just, I mean, guys, I taught kindergarten for 17 plus years. And so I said, good, you made my heart so happy. Absolutely, like I'm gonna say that, but I'm not saying that as a Warsaw Community Schools district employee that can say, yes, this is that mandate. We need to follow the rules, right? You're gonna have your mask on, you're going to have that distance. But if you both have masks on, what's wrong with touching? We're making sure that we're washing our hands, that we have those washing hand times, that we're really intentional with that. So yes, absolutely, I would say that that is completely fine, but ultimately you're going to go through training and you need to follow that. You need to follow what that looks like. Stacey came and stood beside me and she didn't touch me during that time. You can still do those things, but you're right, I'm 100% a hugger. I said that when I walked into church. I was like, it's a good thing you've got that rope up right there because I'd probably give you a hug. I mean, I get that that's just how we're wired, and we are wired for those connections, but we can do it safely.
And our kids need it.
Think about how many kids have gone for the last 5 months and they really haven't had that connection. I'm going to hug kids.
And remember, I mentioned earlier the 7:38:55 rule, right? What's the 55? In communication, the 55% is body language. So what does it communicate to a kid who comes to school and they're like, I got this mask on, it's awkward, I haven't been in school 5 months, I don't know, I'm scared to death. And your teacher comes up, puts her arm around you and says, hey, it's good to see you again. It communicates, so like right away, I'm not afraid of this, I feel like we're in control, and I'm glad to see you. I mean, like it communicates a huge amount to a child.
At the United Way, they had a fundraiser, and Joella Hasselman, who is one of the middle school administrators, she is terrified, and she will rightfully tell anyone that she is terrified of little ones, like the 5 and 6 year old, because she said they're like herding kittens, and which I'm like, yes, bring it on. But she's like, oh, you just don't know. But she said that she was helping students at the drop-off. Kids were coming into school, and she said this girl sat in the car and cried. And she reached out and offered her hand, and she helped her out of the car. And she stopped, and she's like, I know, COVID, oh, what am I supposed to do? She's like, we wash hands, it's fine. This is what kids need. And so I feel like if we have our district administrators that are building administrators that are saying, look, this is what we have to do, right? That we want to make those connections, and that if it's being modeled from the top down, then I think it's okay.
I know as no longer a school district employee, I'd say it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission. Don't tell my kids that, but if they tell you to stop hugging kids, okay. But if they never tell you to stop, I would say they need it. That the benefit of that outweighs any risk. So
Please hug my kids.
yeah. Craig, if you'd move to that next slide. So in talking about behaviors and communication again, So when we have babies and we deal with babies, when they cry, what does the cry signify? I need something, right? Like they're simple. Babies are simple. I heard anyway. Like they cry and they need food or they need comfort or they need a diaper change. Like they cry to communicate to you. We don't get mad at babies when they cry because they're hungry. We know that's how they communicate to us. So let's just, if we take that same approach and we move that to a 12-year-old, when they walk in, or a high schooler, they walk in my class and they have their hood up over their head and their earbuds in and they sit down and they check out and they want nothing to do with anybody. It's the same thing. It's communicating, or when they get angry and they get mad or they slam a book down or they have a response. If we look at their action, their behavior as the same as a baby crying, it's a need that needs to be met. Kids just don't say their needs, they do it through behavior. And so when you become a behavior detective and you see kids, I think this is really vital as a high school teacher. Now, you get to know your kids as they come in your classroom, but as they come in every single morning, I'm meeting my kids. You know, I'm saying, hey, good morning, good to see you. And if I'm happy and I'm positive, you know, they look like zombies. They literally got up 10 minutes ago. They're like, hey, you know, but it still communicates something to them. But I pick up on the way they come in the classroom, and I get to know my kids well enough that I go, that's not normal for them. That's not a normal response. And so then I get to class start at some point. I know I'm going to go see that kid, and I'm going to find out what's going on. And so many times, this has happened so many times in my career, when a kid has a behavior, and I'll say to him in the middle of class, hey, I don't appreciate when you do that. Would you come see me at my desk in a couple minutes? Because I want to talk to you. And then I just continue to do what I'm doing, teaching, and then the kids get on whatever. I go back to my desk, call that student back. And this is so many times. And they start weeping and bawling their eyes out. And I'm like, first few times this happened to me, I was so caught off guard. I'm like, I didn't expect that. It went from angry response in the class to crying at my desk. Because again, there was that cover emotion. And in social settings and social anxiety and all that, they communicated. So I think what I want you to take away from that is when kids communicate, when they behave out, look at it as a form of communication, that they're communicating a need to you, and you don't want to deal with the XYZ, the behavior. I mean, you have to, but you really, if you want to help the child, you need to find out why that behavior happened. And if you do, so many times those conversations, kids will come back and they'll say, police took my mom to jail last night, or my cousin got in a car crash, or something is happening, my grandma got diagnosed with cancer. And like the normal response would be to come in and say something, use your words. They don't do that. So I think we as teachers need to be very good at picking up on the nonverbal communication.
You guys have heard of halts? When the brain flips, one of the ways you can think about the ABCs is this mnemonic that the inmates taught me. It's called halts. Are you hungry, afraid, lonely, tired? Oh my gosh, I forgot S. Oh, sorry, it's halt. Hungry, afraid, lonely, tired. Those are like the 4 core needs. I know they use that in AA. It's halt. And so that's
the power
one
of
thing.
that 90 seconds during that time too. Like, yeah, being able to just take that time and step back. And when Darren was saying, come talk to me in a couple of minutes, it allows for that time of regulation.
And obviously, like for me, I don't want to escalate it, so I want to de-escalate. I want to find some understanding, right? Like it's like being Sherlock Holmes for behaviors in kids.
So let's talk about in the classroom, what does the stress look like, or fight, flight, or freeze, right? So we know that kids, we all have this window of tolerance for stress. And when we leave our window, we tend to go one of 2 ways. We go hypervigilant, which would look like flight or fight, or we go hypovigilant, which looks like freeze. Can you advance the slide for me? So this is across the board. This is for adults and kids, but within the classroom, we know kids that go hypervigilant. You're going to see the acting out, the anger, the climbing the walls, can't sit in their seat. What do we sometimes call that? Can you go back a slide? Sorry, this one right here, yeah. What do we sometimes call that? All right, so we see kids who go hypervigilant and they're going to look like flight or fight. Then we have hypovigilance, which is the opposite, and that's freeze. And in the classroom, you're going to see the 1,000-yard stare, daydreamer. The other one I want to add to this that's not on here is called fawning. Have you heard of fawning? Another way that people respond to stress is they will fawn, which means I'm going to become who you want me to be. That's your pleaser in your classroom. That can be a sign of stress. I'm going to become who you want me to be. So what's kind of interesting about this is we do this thing called window of tolerance. I teach this in the jail. And so people tend to be flight or fight or freeze or fawn. And 80% of girls tend to be freeze or fawn. And 80% of boys tend to be fight or flight. And we see this borne out in who's medicated more for ADHD. Right. So when I'm teaching this to the inmates, I'm talking to them about whether they believe their drug of choice is actually their drug of choice. Because all the inmates will say, my drug of choice is this, or my drug of choice is that. Well, they did this study using this window of tolerance and drug of choice. So, like I said earlier, I believe that drugs are an external attempt to medicate internal pain. So, if we're picking a drug to medicate flight or fight, what type of drug would someone maybe pick? We're thinking downers, right? What do we medicate ADHD with? With stimulants. So, when you are identifying kids in your class, and this is why I tell you this, when you are identifying kids in your class and they are fight or flight, hypervigilant, you do not set them in a chair with a calming blanket to get them back in their window. I'm hypervigilant. I do not want to sit down and binge on Netflix. I want to go for a run. I want to do physical labor. I want to do things that get me going and that brings me back down. It's almost the opposite of what we think. And so for those that freeze or fawn, they tend to go towards depressants. Those are the ones that want the weighted blanket that help them bring back in their window, or they want the music or the calming. So what's important about that as well is that they used to think that people would go one way or the other, and I'm sure that all of you can identify maybe what you do when you're stressed out of your window. People who have had a lot of trauma will do both. They will do both to survive. So it's a maladaptive survival technique that they learned as kids. And so those are our polydrug users. They're going to choose the drug in the moment. So when we're looking at our classroom and we're looking at flight, fight, freeze, and fawn, it's really important that you recognize that what you think maybe hypervigilant can be calmed down with is not what we all guessed, right? We move a slide. So there's two ways to change the brain. And all of our kids are coming in with a stress response system that has been overridden. And so when we're looking at how we change the brain, there's two things, environment and relationship. When your students first walk into your classroom, do you have relationship? Not typically. So you have to leverage environment. Your first weeks of school, you have to leverage environment. So we talked about Groundhog Day, calming a brain. So since I don't have relationship, I'm going to use my environment to calm my class. And that's schedule on the board. That's warning of transitions. That's procedures that are talked about and practiced. And we all know those are not fun to do, but that's what's going to calm your students' brains, is to talk about when someone takes their mask off, what are we doing in our class? We're not all going to be like, Johnny has his mask off, right? So what you're going to do as a teacher is you're going to have to be thinking about these things before school starts. What is going to be my procedure for this? And you're going to have to, it's going to be pandemic, right? What's my procedure for when a mask comes off? What's my procedure for touching a student? You've got to teach all these things to your kids going in. And then you have to make the environment so that it's very routine and very same and very Groundhog Day until you achieve relationship. And relationship can be achieved easily in your classroom in the beginning through community. And that's by talking about what's going on. That's by you guys do community circles here, sitting in your class and talking about yourself and your own fears, right? And opening up the dialogue and talking about emotions. That's how you're building community. Do you guys have any questions on relationship and environment, or fight, flight, freeze, or fawn?
If you're wanting more information, Bruce Perry, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, was a book that really helped me just with some of those instances, and like just the way he wrote the book, it just really helped me. And then at the same time, it also had me look at it and go, oh my goodness, I screwed up for the last 17 years. Because those things that I thought I needed control over in order to maintain that environment so that we could all learn, it was just the very opposite of what I should have been doing.
And just to leave you like with kind of a hopeful piece with that is like, we know better, do better, right? We learn and we do better. And Bruce Perry did this, he works with kids like that have been severely traumatized. And so he ended up doing this study because he wanted to see how effective his work was. Like, how effective is my work? And so he did all these surveys and did all these interviews with all these kids that had moved on and were into adulthood through his practice. And the highest success rates were the kids that lived the farthest from his practice. And the reason they were successful is because they sat in a car with one person who they had a relationship, who poured into them every day. So don't think that you don't have huge effect on kids. It wasn't some great psychologist that helped these kids. It was their parents sitting beside them, or a caregiver, or someone that cared. We don't have enough school counselors. We don't have enough psychologists. We don't have enough specialists in all these things for the kids in our schools. But we have teachers. We have teachers that can pick those hardest kids, the ones that are the shark fins to pour into, because those are the ones that need you. The students that are the hardest to connect with and the hardest for you to like are the ones that need you the most, which is hard, but that's the truth. All right, so I'm going to turn it over because Gina's going to give us a bunch of tools for our toolbox.
I think we're going to watch a quick video first.
Click not now, Craig. On the bottom.
So we laugh, but you know that in a couple of weeks, that is going to be what you're dealing with on a daily basis. And you're going to need a procedure for that too. So like Stacey said, what tools are in our toolbox? What is that going to look like? How many of you love school supplies, or you love going and getting new pens? Leave it, it's okay. Office supplies, we're in safe company right now. And so pre-COVID, like, you're excited, right? You're gonna go to Walmart, you wanna get the best deal on crayons, you definitely need more glue, like, you know what you need in your classroom. And now you're thinking, oh man, that toolbox looks a little different. Everybody has to have their own. This is going to be, you know, this new and heightened different. But we also need to have a toolbox that looks a little bit different for ourselves too. Because as you've heard and as we've been talking, we're going into this and we need to be regulated. And so that's what the end of this is going to look like, and I want it to be a conversation. So if you have questions along the way, please ask. If you'll go to that next slide. So when we look at our personal wellness, if we're gonna start this, we have to start first with ourselves, because if we're not regulated, we can't regulate someone else. If we're not well, we're not gonna be well for our students. We're not gonna be well for our family. And as we talked before, and you see that graph up there again, we have to really look at what we're doing that's taking care of ourselves. It does not have to be a 30-minute run where you're, you know, working on that next 5K. It could be a walk. It could be intentionally taking time to just drink water, that you're sitting, maybe you're reading a book. That personal wellness and what you're doing for yourself can look different based on your likes and your desires, but you need to have that wellness there, that you're doing that for yourself, that you take that 30 minutes and you're selfish. I know I said before, but I plugged the happiness course with the IDOE, and you have that link provided. That is something that takes you through 7 different sessions, I would say, or course, like it's a 7-segmented coursework, and it really helps you look at that, just to say, okay, what does my self-care plan look like? You also have that in your handouts as well, to just really sit down and say, okay, what am I looking at? I definitely had an aha moment as Stacey was talking, because I am not a sit on the couch when things are going. My husband says there's times that he watches me and I'm just like, hey, you want to get mad because you clean the house? Like, I will just go, right? Like, I have to get something done. And it's funny, as I look back, all of those projects that are getting done, and it's because of that stress. And so, hey, it's a good thing, right? You get a little renovation done as well. But what does that self-care plan look like? How am I making sure that there's a balance there? And then that self-knowledge. What are my values and what are my beliefs? How do I make sure that I'm holding true to that? I could be one that could easily fall into that category of wanting to just be a pleaser. If I'm starting to notice that, am I still holding true to what my values and my core beliefs are? And if not, do I have a check in place to say, okay, I need to be careful with that? And then also anticipating those triggers. You heard lots about, like when we were looking at the different parts of that wheel and the stress response and that emotional response. What are some of those triggers where I can say, hey, I think I need to walk away right now. I think I need to get a drink of water. I've been really intentional through this time to increase my water because I know it makes me feel better. And I know people are like, ugh, but I don't like water. Your body needs water. You know, find a way to be able to drink it. And it does help. Sleep is something else. I've had lots of people say, but I don't sleep well. Well, again, going back to that happiness course, and there's other things that you can do along with that physical activity that allow for that better sleep. And when you do that, you have that stronger personal wellness. And then just being purposeful with your time. We promoted Run Hard, Rest Well, which I also provided that in the references as well, but we're really good at running hard. We can do that well. As a society, we know how to just push, push, push. But we really need to be intentional with how we rest and what that rest looks like, and giving ourselves time that we can put our phone down, that we can disconnect, that we can allow to be present. Our students need us to be present, right? But our families do too, and we need to be present for ourselves. Go ahead and go on to that next slide. So as we continue that conversation, just looking at that mental health piece as well, you have another handout in your folder that is from the IDOE, and it talks about that self-care plan, and it's very well thought out. They did a really good job with that. You can see up there the tips for managing stress and anxiety. Just having that near you, that you have that as, okay, what can I do right now? Because I think lots of times, especially when our lids are flipped, we really don't know. It's like that kid that said, I don't know why I did it. Well, I don't know what to do right now for myself. You know, what are some things when I am in that learning part of my brain, when I am regulated, that I can say, okay, these are things that help me. This is what I can do. So then that way when we start to notice that stress, that we can have that there, that we have that plan. Our brains don't like that unpredictability. And what is our life right now? So much unpredictability, right? I mean, it's just like you don't know tomorrow. Like Stacey said, like goggles, I can't imagine. Like I'm having a hard enough time. So it's just, what are they gonna say next? And we have to, I mean, if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry. So you have to just almost laugh through some of it, but just understanding that tomorrow it might change, but what can I control? What is it within that realm? And what is my plan gonna look like? And then that mental health self-care wheel, there's a page and it just talks about that anxiety and just understanding that that is real. And when we see that and we understand, like going back to the survey, that with that percentage of people that say, I understand that it's important, I just haven't scheduled that time yet. Now is that time to do that. Commit to that. And even if you commit to it 3 days a week, you're doing better than what you were doing before. Just making sure that you're purposeful with that time. On the next slide, you'll see the Sources of Strength wheel, which is something Warsaw Community Schools is using at our high school, and we have used for the last couple of years. It's also something that we're rolling out in our elementaries, and I'm excited about that because of that common vocabulary. And you'll see that this wheel has 8 different areas, or spokes to the wheel, and it talks about that family support, our positive friends, our mentors, and you go through it, and we understand that I'm not always going to be doing great with all 8 things. And whenever we look at this wheel and we have that conversation, you're able to look at that, and I encourage you right now to just identify 2 things that you're like, hey, I do pretty well with that. I've got a good family support, or this would be something. So just look at that right now and identify just 2 to yourself. And then that next step, that next part of that conversation, still back with that wheel, as we're looking at it, then we say, what can I improve? Because I'm not always going to be doing great with all 8 things. When I looked at that today, I was thinking about it, and I was like, wow, you know what? I should be doing better with my mentors. Like, what does that look in my life where I'm making sure that I have those people that I'm checking in with? How can I make sure that I'm doing that better? And so this week, I might be identifying that. But you know what? 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, when school is getting ready to start, and I might look at that wheel again, that could change, and that's okay. Again, just like we don't want to do mask shaming, we're not going to do wheel shaming. We know that there's different times in our life where we do things better, but it just always goes back to that conversation, and you can celebrate, what am I doing well, but then also, what can I improve on? And when we look at that physical health, we could say that, man, that sleep is something we could put into that medical access, but also, how am I doing on my sleep? Maybe I could improve that. So as we continue to think about that toolbox, and we're thinking about things that could be in that toolbox, we're going to have to look at it a little bit different. So I tried to be creative about what I thought my toolbox would look like for my class, and I figure headphones is something that all of our kids are going to be looking for, and they're going to have something like that. I was very excited to find Colors of the World crayons, because of course Crayola is going to optimize on the fact that we need to make sure all colors are represented. As you saw my family picture, my daughter immediately saw this and was drooling. So she was very excited, but you know, we can make jokes about this, but not only are we dealing with COVID, but we're also dealing with race. We're also dealing with riots. There's so many different things that we're having conversations about. And like Stacey said before, and Darren as well, we have to provide a space where we can have that conversation. And so what does that look like as we are empowering our students? And so, you know, you are gonna have like those basic things of having your folder and making sure that you're having paper and, of course, name tags, because you're not going to be able to identify half of your kids because they're going to have a mask on unless they wear the same one, right? So that's going to be a vital of importance there. But you also can be really intentional about some of the other things that maybe it's the books that you're selecting. And this one says, my magic breath. And, you know, Stacey was talking about that. And what is that power of just breathing in with 4 and holding it for 7 and then breathing out 8. Today in a training, the presenter said when he breathes in, somebody told him to notice the cold air going in through his nose. I want you to breathe in right now and notice that. And then breathe out. I really need that cold air. I get hot. As you know, we were laughing about my hair, whether it's up or down. And when I get hot, my hair goes up in a bun. So most of the time, that's how you're probably going to see me. But man, that cold air, which is part of my of not wanting to have that mask on, is because it feels so hot. But I really notice that. And I still notice that with my mask on. So maybe that's a tool that you could give your students. Notice that cool air that's going in your nose. Having that as a resource. We need to be intentional with the books that we're sharing. You know, maybe it's a wordless book that we bring out, and I have lists and lists of books that I can share with you. All you have to do is send me an email, if you'll go to the next slide. But we just want to be able to have those conversations so that we can empower our students. Did that go backwards? Or? Oh, sorry, I was looking at this one and not. That our learning environment, as we're looking at this, let me just touch on that really quick. Our teachers need to be really intentional with their demeanor, with our approach, our behavior. We talk about that teacher language. We have to be intentional, like we had talked about earlier, that volume is huge. You know, if I'm talking with my students and I start to raise my voice, that could be triggering something that's happening to them on a daily basis at home, and you're gonna lose that student. What does that look like? And that's not to say that I can't from time to time. That's gonna happen, right? I might be using my voice because I'm excited and I've still triggered a student. So then we have the power of repair. And Dan Siegel's work talks a lot about that. What does that repair look like? And being able to walk alongside and say, you're okay, this is safe, we're fine, but just being able and being willing to do that. And then just understanding that my emotions, whether I say anything at all, my students that have that high trauma, they're gonna notice it as soon as they walk in the room. Those are the ones that talks about your autonomic nervous system. That's that scan that happens. The same reason why we say be at the door, because our students that have that the high trauma and that high anxiety, when they don't see you, they're walking down the hall and they're like, I hope she's here today. I hope she's here today. You know, is my teacher going to be here? And when you're right there at the door, then it helps to calm them in that moment. And you think, well, it doesn't really, does it really matter? Yes, it matters. They need that. They need that greeting. They need that predictability. So just being intentional with that. And then when we do that, then we know that it carries over into the performance in the classroom. So we have to be intentional. And then just intentional with noticing. Like Darren was saying, I remember one of the first trainings I went to, they talked about the power of that hoodie, right? But some of those kids wear that because that's protecting to them. And it's something they have control over. And if I say, could you please take your hood off? And they don't, then I store that away. That's not gonna be a fight. I'm gonna fight right in that moment. I've asked, they haven't. Then I'm gonna walk over a little bit later and I'm gonna have a conversation. Hey, I noticed your hood's still up. How's everything going today? You know, I'd really like to be able to see you. What are you gonna choose to fight in that moment? And especially in those first few weeks when you're establishing what school looks like, what their new routine and their new normal looks like, we just have to be, sensitive to some of those things.
And I think it's important to add to what Gina's saying that, we're scaffolding stress for our kids. So we start out with the environment that's Groundhog Day and very same. Well, then we're gonna dose stress so that then they're able to start performing academically and be doing those things. So.
Yeah, this work's messy, you guys. It's not gonna be like, hey, here we go, do these 3 things and you've got it. But we know that with that stable, consistent environment, that we can provide that safety for our students. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So then empowering our students, what that common vocabulary looks like is so essential. Having that safe space, being able to, have that repair like we talked about. You'll see up there's a check-in, how are you doing? You guys, they could come in every day and say, I'm feeling fine, I'm red, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. And then all of a sudden they realize, man, she is not gonna stop asking. She's gonna ask me again today. It's like the power of the 2x10. That you're checking in with them every day for 2 minutes, not about school, consistently, same student for 10 days. By day 7, they're like, oh my gosh, they're not going away. They're still coming up. And maybe that's day 4 when they're feeling that way. But then by the end, they're sharing with you. They're having a conversation. They realize, man, they're not going anywhere. This is an invested person. And so can we be that person? Can we continue to ask? Because eventually, and maybe it'll just be that, man, the night before was crummy. And so then they might say to you, I'm not great today. And I know you're safe because you've asked me every day how I'm doing. And now today isn't good. What does that conversation look like? Do you have time to talk to me right now? Or when can we have a conversation? So just being willing.
I think it'd be great too. I think high school can just, and a lot of junior highs can be a different animal with check-in. So Darren, will you talk about how you did check-in with your high school students?
So secondary level, what's the number one priority in the mind of every secondary student walking through the halls? Lunch. No, I wasn't thinking lunch. Okay, that's right there. That's second priority. No, it's social anxiety, right? That's what it is. And I watch my students on a day-to-day basis as they come in my classroom, and they are very aware of their perceptions, of other people's perceptions of them, right? Like, does my breath smell bad? Does my hair, right? They're looking in their phone at their hair.
Is my mask nice?
Right there. They constantly, this is what I like to say, is everything they do all day long is driven by social anxiety. So if you in the classroom, when you have a kid come in the classroom and they have this anxiety going on from their peers, and you try to do something that makes them feel awkward, they're not going to want nothing to do with that. If you try to single them out, right, they're going, like, this is going through their mind. They're going, I don't want to be too smart. I don't want to be dumb. I want to be kind of smart. I don't want to be the teacher's pet. I want to be popular, but I don't want to be that popular. I don't want, they can't be all these things, but they try to be them all. So when I talked with my kids in the classroom, it was always short, so they didn't feel awkward. But it was, hey, I see you, I recognize you, I'm glad you're here, something like that. And then I'm on to the next person, so I didn't single them out. And I think you read your students, and some students, they need to check in more than others. Some students, they come in, they're like, if I talk to this kid, 20 minutes later, I'll still be talking because they just talk and talk and talk and talk. So you just figure that out. But secondary level is different than elementary, where, the kids are just always, they love school still.
Yeah, we talk about trusted adults and having those conversations, and we talked a lot about that at the high school level. But when we went and started talking about that in our elementary level, some of our students couldn't identify who their trusted adult was at school. And so then as that SEL team was looking at that, they were like, what do you mean? And classroom teachers, no, they know they can come to me. And so part of that then goes back to identifying, what does a trusted adult mean, right? Almost teaching that as a lesson too. And so having that, but then we also had a group of kids, and we see this at the high school too, they don't feel like they need that trusted adult at school. They're doing fine, and they have strong family support. So then that goes back to that conversation with the wheel, that perhaps they don't feel like they need that. So we still help and try to hope that they can find somebody, because what if something happens? Who is somebody? And they'll say, oh yeah, I could talk to a teacher, but I don't really need to. And so then understanding that not everything has to be, oh no, there must be a trauma, or oh no, this must be bad, but just being willing to have that conversation. So as we go to that next slide, you see pictures of community circles. And like Darren said, this looks different at a high school level, but this is something that all teachers can do. This is something that K through 12, we can stop and have a check-in. It does not have to be around a circle. You see some of those kids that are sitting. That community circle time could be a quick conversation. It could be journaling. Like Stacey said before, the power of writing. What does that prompt look like? And then how am I, just checking in with my kids and having that conversation? But I also provided for you on the next slide a structure of what a community circle, or perhaps you want to call it like a talking circle or advisory time, whatever that might look like. And then what do we do during that time? The power of starting with that focused attention practice, which is breathing. And within our school district, we have like the Calm Classroom, which provides a script of just, what do I say? This breathing thing is weird. And after I breathe in for 5 and breathe out for 5, and I'm not sure what else to do, we have this as a resource. And if you need that resource, please reach out to me. But just providing that time, because you don't know what's racing. Darren was saying that social anxiety. So in the hall, oh my gosh, I had to walk by this guy's, and this is awful. And you don't know what's running through their head, or maybe they're worried about the test that's coming up next, or maybe they're worried about what's going to be happening when they go home. Provide that space where they can just stop and breathe, and just allow for a little bit of stillness. How many of our kids get to just sit and breathe and just have that time? And so providing that space.
One of the cool things with the inmates, when I would work with them, I would do a 2-hour class. I would come back that night, and I did a community circle for an hour and a half with male and female inmates. And so this can be done with junior high and high school kids. It was the most impacting and amazing thing to see a group of tattooed men that are hardened by jail open up and start weeping in front of each other. And the beauty of a community circle in your classroom is that you are not the one carrying the burden of pain. You guys are carrying it as a classroom. You're carrying it with all of you instead of one person. That's how we avoid burnout.
And it builds that empathy too, right? Like you're able to see that. And we've had teachers that will say, intentional every single day. They were doing that community circle time. They had the first 15 minutes of the day set aside for that. In October, they had the relationship with their students that the previous year they had in May. You guys, that's huge. That's 9 weeks compared to an entire school year. And if I know my kids that well in October, then wow, where are we going academically? You can't tell me that those scores aren't going to look different because they're in that frame of mind. And you know what? Maybe for that one student, it's going to take a little bit longer because that trauma is more. But ultimately, my point with this being is when you're providing that predictability, when you're providing that safe space, you're going to get so much farther than without it. And you'll see there it says a brain interval. We also have resources for that. You can look up videos on brain intervals. Responsive Classroom has recharge and refocus, brain breaks. Those are all opportunities. And I've got I think maybe the next slide. This, prior to the brain intervals, 70%, look at this statistic, 70% of our trauma-affected youth go on to lead successful, productive lives. We should obviously strive for 100%, but just looking at what, wow, 70%, so like, yes, it could be hard right now, but we can still, there's times that when we're doing this work, we're thinking, oh man, this is just, it's not gonna happen. One of my kindergartners from 18 years ago, she graduated and I happened to run into her at the grocery and I was like, what are you doing? And she was able to say, oh, I'm headed here for college. I'm going into medical assisting. And I was just so excited to see that, you know what, she was one of my struggling little kindergartners, 18 years ago. And what is she doing now? Like, this is so awesome. And so just knowing that they do have those stories, but we have to be able to see where they're at and then help them get to that next step. And when we look at that and just understand that, like, what does that learning mode look like? And we've been talking a lot about those strategies, but we just need to remember that we've got to prep that brain. So that's why those focused attention practices are so important, because they help us to regulate with our students and to be able to walk alongside them and give them that space. I included this next video, but we're not going to actually watch it. This is Just Breathe. How many of you have seen this before? I know I've used this and I still love it. You have this link so that you can watch it, but just because of time, I want to go ahead and go on over that. But it just talks about like the power of breathing together, and it shows students of all ages and adults of all ages that are walking and sitting beside and just breathing. And we just know that this is for everyone. This is not just strategies that I say, oh, this is great in an elementary. These are strategies that we can use. We also talk about like fidget boxes or amygdala reset kits. And the United Way provided these for our summer school students. And just knowing that, yes, there's power in like giving this to a student and you think, what in the world, how can this be regulating? But we know that when they're in their downstairs brain or when they're mad or upset, they're focused on that thing. And if you say, go in the hallway, you need to think about this, all they do is go in the hallway and get more mad because they're thinking about that thing. They're not resetting. You're actually isolating, which is the very thing you don't want to do. You're teaching them that you can't handle it and you need them to go there. But if you can say, okay, amygdala reset, and people are like, great, you're giving a student a toy. They're going to go and play. No, we set up a procedure. We're setting up procedures for everything. You actually have a handout that talks about what can these procedures look like for that amygdala reset. That this is not a ball, this is a tool, right? Like, what does that look like and how can we, and maybe students, I love being able to ask students and they'll tell you what they like to use and why they like to use it. We even have hourglass timer, and that's a good visual because the students know, like with those procedures, that with like 1 or 2 flips, then they know that they have to go back. So you can set up that. And you can say, okay, with 2 flips, and this whole box was $20 on Amazon. It can be here in 2 days. Perhaps you might even need it. Some people are about the different sprays and scents. This says Uplift, mood enhancing spray. I mean, if you believe it, right? Like whatever it takes. Maybe this is what, you give them happy spray as they walk in. You can do all sorts of different things. That toolbox is going to look a little different, but if it's going to help them get there, you just have to worry about allergies during that time. When we go on to the next slide, we look at our brain intervals, and we understand that brain break, and I'm just going to read to you right now. It says a short break taken at regular intervals of instruction to achieve optimal learning. These breaks include physical movement, practicing breathing, singing, dancing, making connections with each other. And I would also encourage you that during this time, yes, even if you are not a singer, if you have put up something that they, like even if it's like a video, that you're participating, because there's power in doing this beside them, that you're taking that. And you guys, I can't tell you how many times I've started with something, perhaps as I'm teaching a lesson to students, that I start with that focused attention practice, because I need that. I know that I need to stop, and I need to breathe, and I need to settle myself. The same way if I'm reading or if I'm doing something and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm about to fall asleep. Well, if I feel that way, then my students must feel that way too. We need to be intentional, and we need to get up and move. There's so much research behind, like they were saying before with the playground, getting your students up and moving helps them engage so that they can be learning ready. And we can be intentional with integrating learning into it, and sometimes we can just be silly and have fun. And so just having that balance of both just really helps to bring back that joy of being at school. That next slide, please. So this is a quote. You guys, I know the first 30 people are getting this Fostering Resilient Learners book. And this is a quote from that book. And I'm going to look at it from right here. Just that way. It says, in deepening my understanding of trauma and its effects on children, I have learned to look for triggers and root causes of students' actions. I've learned to look at a student's ability to cope with present circumstances and react accordingly, providing the support and tools needed to give the child a sense of security and control. When students are taught coping skills and productive ways to communicate their needs, their behaviors, social skills, and a sense of self-worth improve, I have seen how positive praise can completely change a child's behavior. When a school staff receives trauma training and implements trauma-sensitive practices, students thrive. And my hope would be that as we continue to do this work, that you take that knowledge and have that, like right now I would say that you're trauma-informed. You've received this, you understand that information, but that you take that next step and you become invested. You become invested in how you respond and how your classroom looks and even how you communicate at home. And that work takes time. And I think that that's why I love Dan Siegel's books, because he talks about how you don't have to do it perfect, and there's always that power of repair. But you deserve that. We talk about our students, and yes, our students deserve, and we want that. I want that for my babies when they walk into the classroom. But you personally deserve that. You need to be able to say, hey guys, guess what? I've said 5 o'clock, I'm shutting my phone down. I'm not gonna check my email right now. And that's okay. You deserve that break, because if you push, like Stacey said before, you're just going to go to burnout. You're not gonna last as long. And you're obviously here because you have passion and because you love your kids and you're looking forward to getting back into this work. And no matter what that capacity that it's set up on the screen, you're all teachers in one way or another. Some of you are that front line, the first people that are gonna see the kids. And so you have to be fresh and ready and take care of yourself during that too.
We're just about done. I want to kind of end with a story and just a change of focus maybe for some of us. In my classroom this year, Warsaw High, I had a student, my biology class, and first week of school, you get to know your kids a little bit, and this kid was kind of rough around the edges. It was really obvious. And he was kind of edgy. I'll call him Johnny. His real name was Jack, but to protect his identity, I'll call him Johnny. And so Johnny, he's in my class, and I'm like, something's going on with this kid. So I went and I did a little bit of homework. I went to a teacher who had him last year, and I said, hey, tell me about Johnny. Well, last year he was arrested 3 times. He spent half the year with an ankle monitor on his ankle. He, in and out of juvenile hall, in trouble all the time. Parents are divorced, live with grandparents. That's all I need to know. So back in my classroom, he if he did any work at all, it was really, really average. Maybe, he would do a bit. He was going to pull a D in my class if he was lucky. And so as I started to get to know him, and he was one of the kids I made sure I checked in with every day. Every day he came in my class, I'd say, hey, good to see you. I like your shoes, or, just some kind of a positive comment, so he knew I was paying attention to him. I don't think it really was making a whole lot of difference, but at one point, he did an assignment all the way, like the whole thing, and it was well done. And I called him back to my desk in class. The kids were doing something, and I said, hey, I just want you to realize, I recognize, number one, that you did this assignment, you did it really well, and I like what you put, and number two, I appreciate your attitude's been a lot better lately in my class. I said, you have good leadership skills, you're obviously a good athlete, you play baseball, and I just appreciate the way you've been acting in my class and doing your work. And his eyes were this big, no one's ever said anything positive to me in my life, right? I'm the bad kid or whatever. And I think that was a persona that had kind of been put on him. And over the next few months, I watched this kid become a B student. He started turning in all his work. And it was really awkward because there were other kids in his class that they were like, what are you doing? You're doing your work. Wow, you're making us look bad. Stop doing that. And so I think that quote is really true. The power of a positive statement in that kid's life when everybody else just said, I said, who is this kid? Negative, 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 all these bad things. But he was not a bad kid. He had some really hard things going at home, right? Divorce and separation of parents and and all those things. And it was manifesting itself in the classroom. So I had a good relationship with him, and he had a really good year. And I think the point, and what I want you to encourage you guys is, do not sacrifice long-term gains for short-term gains. Our job as teachers is to change the world. That is your job. Your job is not to teach content. Your job is to form the next generation of human beings on the planet. And that's the long game. I want my kids, when they have kids of their own, years later, I see them, I want them to say, man, you made a difference in my life. You helped me to be who I am today. I'd love for them to learn some biology, ecosystems are important, but I want them to know I cared about them, that they are worthy, that they have value, and that they're going to contribute back to society, and they're going to be a good dad, a good mom someday. Those are the things I want them to walk away from my classroom. And I think all of you would probably appreciate that. As a parent of 7 kids, what do I want my kids to say? At the end of the school year, I want to say, man, my teacher really cared about me. And I appreciate that they loved me for who I am. So I just want to encourage you guys, focus on that long game. Don't get bogged down in the day-to-day weeds of lesson planning and learner objectives and state standards and all that stuff that occupies so much time. You got to put that stuff aside for a while sometimes, and you got to just make sure you focus on the kids.